All right, everyone, it's time to finally talk about Hey everyone, this is Kevin Rodriguez, film critic of iCritic.net. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time here with me today for this very, very unusual topic. And this is going to kind of be a review of Wish, but really it's going to be a discussion on how Disney has lost its way and how basically they are selling people fake goods that do not cash checks. Now, when James Gunn was being asked about the recent DCEU, he had this to say on Threads, and I'm going to grab this piece of paper so I can read exactly what he said. Forgive the cutoff. One of the problems with the DCEU content in the past year was that there was no real consistency within the universe itself. There was never meant, and I never said, as this is how we always envisioned it, all animated video game content would be in the DCU. I did and still say most TV and film will be in the DCU with the occasional Elseworld tale like Matt's the Batman, but it will have to be exceptional. And when fans quiz Gunn on which characters they could expect to see in upcoming projects, Gunn held both firm the subject of cameos, which has of late become a regular, almost expected surprise in superhero films. Think Nicolas Cage in The Flash. And he says, that's fine if it doesn't disrupt the story. It's the plot contrivances that develop from a cameo, not the cameo itself. I call that cameo porn, and it has been one of the worst elements of recent superhero films. If a character is in a film, they have to have a reason to be there story-wise. And you know what? I absolutely agree with him. Now here's the thing. A cameo is something that is put in the background. It might not necessarily have anything to do with what's being discussed, but if you notice it and you recognize what it's from, you can actually feel pretty good about yourself. Like, oh, hey, I recognize that. I recognize that thing there. And of course, Disney films have had cameos or Easter eggs. Aside from the various hidden Mickeys and stuff that they put in there, there have been examples of cameos showing up in Disney films. But they're always kind of there just as a little blink and you'll miss it thing. A little surprise, if you will. Like, it's a nice little discovery, but it doesn't have much to do with the story. The story doesn't stop to linger on the cameo. If you see it and you recognize it, it's there, it's fun, and then they move on. And yet, the Disney company specifically has been going so overboard on the cameos that you're starting to notice that the cameos seem to be taking over the story, and the fact that the script almost seems to be written around the cameos rather than the cameos being the Easter eggs they hide inside the movie. Now, Easter eggs / cameos really got big with Iron Man when Samuel L. Jackson stood in the Iron Man end credit scene and said that he wants to talk to Tony Stark about the Avenger movement. Now, that was clearly something that only fans of the comic books would have known at the time, that hey, this is leading up to the Avengers, but in James Gunn's point of view, yes, that would be appropriate, because Iron Man was always going to be the start of a multiple movie series heading into the Avengers. The Avengers was always the end game. So whether or not you recognized it or not, it's like it had a purpose to be there. And yet, Marvel started to go way overboard with the cameos. And I remember it was becoming like a problem, especially with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where they're hopping to multiverses. They're seeing alternate versions of characters. You're seeing big name actors reprise roles from previous films or fan casting in roles that may or may not carry over. And I just remember being especially distracting. There was even a cameo by the Inhumans actor, and everyone cheered for a character that starred in a show that was so bad it got canceled after one season. But because, hey, we recognize that character, let's cheer. And he still wasn't an interesting character. This was especially bothersome because when you consider where the first Doctor Strange movie left off, there was a lot of places they could have taken the second one, but the most logical conclusion would have been to, well, follow up the story. And yet Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness has almost nothing to do with the previous film, aside from his love interest getting married to a new person that's not him. Like, otherwise, the story, the multiverse hopping, all that jazz, it doesn't really have much to do with anything in the previous film. I mean, I guess it follows up on WandaVision, but if you didn't watch WandaVision, then the movie doesn't work. I mean, the Marvel movies have serious problems with all of that right now. But you know what? It's not like Marvel is the only person who is going overboard with this. Remember Space Jam: A New Legacy? I called that the worst film of the year, and I gave it a scathing review because it seemed like a giant ad for HBO Max. Now, Max, with, you know, references to Game of Thrones, Batman, Superman, The Clockwork Orange, guys, in a PG-rated family film, really? And it just felt like marketing cynicism until we started really getting into the whole AI debate, where now the movie's actually getting better as a result because it almost seems prophetic now rather than soulless. I don't know if that was the intention, but if it was, Malcolm D. Lee, I'm going to tip my hat off to you. I apologize for my 0-star review. You were way ahead of what I was thinking of at the time. And yet that doesn't wipe the stain off the fact that Space Jam: A New Legacy seems like an advertisement for itself rather than actually telling a story. And hey, if Warner Brothers is going to advertise themselves, why not have Disney do it as well? We got Ralph Breaks the Internet, the sequel to Wreck-It Ralph. Now, I have to be upfront, I gave this movie 3 stars in my print review. That is technically a recommendation. And the primary reason I gave it that positive review is because it was very similar to the Emoji Movie. And if anything, Ralph Breaks the Internet proved that the Emoji Movie did not have to be as terrible as it was. So compared to that, this was pretty good. But I did write in my review, which you can find on my website. I mean, I feel no problems pushing it. I do have a website. That's where print reviews wind up. I did write something along the lines that if watching Frozen was like watching Disney create timeless magic before your eyes, watching Ralph Breaks the Internet was the equivalent of watching Disney masturbate. And forgive the graphic description, but honestly, that is exactly what it seemed like. I mean, you go through that movie, it's like, oh, we own Star Wars, we own Marvel, we own the princesses, we own Winnie the Pooh, we have Stanley, oh, love us, love us, love us, love us, love us. I forgive the graphic description or the skit, whatever you want to call that, but it is true. You watch Ralph Breaks the Internet, and this Star Wars, Marvel, Disney princess, Winnie the Pooh, references to Disneyland, references to Mickey Mouse, none of it has anything to do with the story. It's there to get people to have a dopamine high, seeing something that they like on the screen, and it's like, yeah, we did it. Now, some might say the original Wreck-It Ralph had cameos that didn't exactly go anywhere, but again, video game world and all that, it made sense for them to be there, but also Wreck-It Ralph was a good story on its own. It wasn't crutching to these cameos the way Space Jam, Doctor Strange, and Ralph Breaks the Internet did. And then you want to take it a step further. What about Disney's Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie? A movie that is polarizing and for very good reason. It's because when I watched the Chip and Dale movie, I greatly enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. And then I sat down to write my review and I was trying to articulate why I enjoyed it. I was struggling. I was struggling to remember what was it about this that was making me happy. So I stopped my review. I went back, I watched it again, and I realized that I was having all these emotional reactions to other cartoon characters. Saw Roger Rabbit, that was fun. You see Ugly Sonic, that was funny. You see the Indiana Jones thing. You see so many references to other cartoons, but you know what wasn't really grasping me? I didn't think the story was that interesting. I didn't think Chip and Dale themselves were that funny. It really wasn't even a Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie. This could have been 2 animated characters for anything, and the story would have been the same. That's how little it had to do with the Chip and Dale Rescue Ranger franchise. And then you think about it, it's like, okay, Randy Marsh from South Park is there. I mean, you get giddy thinking about it because, M-rated South Park, it's in a Disney movie. What does it have to do with this movie? Not much. Not much. And I know people are going to say, oh, but it's like Who Framed Roger Rabbit? It's like, yeah, but you know what? Who Framed Roger Rabbit took place in Toontown for half of the movie. And so all those cameos made sense. And they were fun. But if you took them out, it was still a hilarious buddy cop movie with very, very impressive animation and live action blending. Whereas Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, you take away the cameos, and I don't think you have a whole lot left. Which brings me to Wish. Now, there are plenty of reviews out there. My own print review talks about the story deficiencies, the fact that Asha has an adorkable personality the way the last few Disney princesses did, but it doesn't really feel earned this time. How King Magnifico is kind of on the edge of like, well, it seems like he's a sympathetic villain, but then he goes totally evil, and it was like very arbitrary how that all happened. I mean, these are all flaws of the movie for sure. But the biggest problem I realize is because this tribute to Disney movies just made the movie worse. It's been a few weeks. I'm sure you've seen it by now. If you haven't seen it, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think it's worth seeing. But if you want to avoid spoilers, click away from the video right now. But the few positive reviews that I did see were on Disney YouTube channels where a bunch of hardcore Disney fans sat around, and rather than talking about how great the songs were, how wonderful the new characters were, they would talk about the things they noticed. Oh, did you see this Snow White reference? Oh, did you see the Cinderella reference? Did you see the Peter Pan reference? Did you catch that line that calls back to The Little Mermaid? That chicken dance sequence, doesn't it look a lot like Be Our Guest? This is a movie where at least it seems like the script was written around the references. Like the whole point of this movie is to remind you of all those other great memories that Disney made, but it's not creating any new memories. And this is where Disney animation has really fallen into a pit. And look, I do blame Bob Iger for this. His mandate, like, oh, we can make sequels of our movies. Now, the thing that made Disney films special is that they brought us to new worlds and they brought us new characters every few years. But then, let's make a Wreck-It Ralph 2. Let's make a Frozen 2. Let's make Zootopia 2. And while we're at it, let's make Frozen 3 and 4. Disney is not creating new memories. They are franchising. They are hitting the dopamine hit. And Wish is, as James Gunn would put it, cameo porn. There's not any actual cameos, but everything about the movie is deliberately placed to remind you of another better movie. And honestly, if Disney were going to do that, if that was the intent, like, hey, we want to remind people of these other movies, of these other things we did, you know what they should have made? They should have made a Kingdom Hearts movie. I mean, look, great story, franchise potential, and the Disney characters being a part of this massive world is baked into the story. Why didn't they make this? That would have made so much more sense. But no, they made Wish and they went cameo heavy. And the thing is, I think people recognize this even if they can't articulate it. Like, they seem to appreciate the cameos probably because they recognize it and they remember the old stuff and it brings them a smile, and they don't realize, no. These references are what's making this movie bad. Because this movie could have been great if it was its own thing and they were focused on telling its own story. Instead, they were focused on reminding you of other better movies. And look, the last thing you want to do is remind people that Beauty and the Beast exists, and this is what you're making today. That is a recipe for disaster. In terms of the DC universe that James Gunn is making, I really hope he course corrects and he reels in these cameos. And I hope people start realizing that the cameos and the references are actually what's ruining things. In fact, whenever a movie is announced that's part of a sequel, automatically people start thinking, who do you think is going to show up? What cameos do you think are going to be there? And like, what movies is going to connect to? And you know what? It's gone too far. It's ruined several movies, but the fact that Disney did it in Wish, and that is why Wish is primarily terrible, well, I think that means that the Disney studios really need to take a step back and they need to look and it's like, you know what? We have to be better. We have to create the magic when other companies won't. Anyway, that's my take. But I would like to know, what are your thoughts on this? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'd love to know. Comment below, like, favorite, share, subscribe. And do you notice any other, Easter eggs that, maybe we miss? Maybe there are Easter eggs in this very video. Who knows? But I would like to know, so let us know. And as always, flame responsibly. Have a good one.